folks. Thank you for joining us this morning for the networking, for the fireside chat that we just had with Director Clayton and Ksenia. We're going to shift gears a little bit into some of the big content pieces that we're about to focus on over the rest of today and tomorrow. And so in your registration, on your agendas, you're going to see that we're focusing on 4 big topics that we have heard from you, that we've heard in conversations with our partners across the state, around some of the big challenges that we're thinking through as we're trying to move from our plans to funded projects to implemented and actionable projects. And so that includes thinking through our financing and funding conversation, thinking through our workforce. That's what we're going to focus on today, these 2 topics. Tomorrow, it's moving through thinking about the data and the argument for the economic impact of broadband and why we need to continue investing in it, and how regions can come together to collaborate on broadband infrastructure and digital opportunity that complements other goals that we have for our communities. Before each of these, we're going to have a little appetizer, a little 15-minute TED Talk, just to get our minds thinking on some of these bigger subjects, and to introduce some of the topics that our panelists, our experts, are going to be unpacking in their panels. And so I have the pleasure of leading off with our broadband funding conversation. So quick show of hands. Who here likes money? Who here likes having to go out and find it? Mm-hmm. So if you are not familiar with Texas Rural Funders, we are a membership organization of philanthropy. I see several of our members here. Hi, folks. We're glad that you came into Dallas. And we exist to help philanthropy pull the special levers that it has to strengthen rural Texas. And so you may know us from our broadband work. You may only know us from our broadband work. But over the past few years, we have developed several broadband resources to help think through how can rural communities push forward on this big generational challenge of getting all of our communities connected. And one of them that we put out in 2023 is called Finding Funding for Fiber, really focused on this broadband financing challenge, written for community leaders, for anchor institutions, for funders to think about how they can help bring this capital together. And you'll see on the packets on your tables and on this QR code, you can follow along as we introduce the materials. It helps demystify some of the vocabulary, some of the tools that we're talking about when we're talking about broadband financing, as well as some general steps that we can think about when we're getting our coalitions together around a public-private partnership for broadband, especially in a rural area. But we're going to focus on 2 topics, 2 big ideas from this publication. The first is, why is broadband so expensive to build in the places where we still need to build it? And this is really getting into this idea that the unique characteristics of our community, our needs, those are priced into the cost of our project. And that seems very obvious when we start to look under the hood about what is driving the costs of these projects. What is the state of the existing network in the regions where we're working at? Where are the existing connections to the middle mile, the last mile fiber? Are we trying to connect MDUs? Are we trying to grow out from where our community anchor institutions already are a hub for connection? What is the availability of our workforce? Do we have the materials, the training, the partners in place to quickly execute on these projects? And how much will it cost to get them here to do it? We can think about the types of terrain that we're trying to navigate with these projects. Are we building out in far west Texas through the deserts around Big Bend? Or are we trying to cut down trees, bore through rock in parts of East Texas or South Texas? And finally, what is the cost of financing? What is our mix of debt to equity? What is the interest rate on that? And what are some of the other ways that we can bring in financing? And how much does that just sort of generally cost to bring into the conversation? So in talking with one of our panelists coming up next, Jennifer Prather, the CEO at Totalcom, while we were building this publication, we asked her, as the leader of a ISP serving rural West Central Texas, what are you thinking of when you're putting together the cost for a project? Tell us how this breaks down. Why is it so expensive to reach the folks who have needed broadband the longest and perhaps the most at this point? And the numbers really speak for themselves. This is on page 8 of the publication, but it's an inverse relationship. The more spread out the people are, the higher the project cost, because we are looking at developing this infrastructure in areas where we have to dig up or cut down or bore through more of the natural environment. We may be importing talent from other parts of the state or other parts of the country to help us through these projects. And of course, when we think about affordability and uptake and adoption of this new utility when it gets built, there are fewer people to spread the cost over. And so that is a larger burden on rural communities, for example, in affording the utility ongoing, which also has an effect on how do we pay back for building it and having to finance all of this up front, and are we taking enough revenue from the operation of the utility to continue its ongoing maintenance? The upshot is that for the communities that still need to get connected with physical infrastructure, we're going to need to get a little creative with how we put together this capital stack. And so we also, in finding funding for fiber, profile 4 different rural communities, because there is not one way to put this money together necessarily. And we have examples from across the state of rural communities that have found different paths to fund it. And they sort of run on a spectrum from how can we work with private companies already in our region to maybe something more participatory that builds on other assets in our region. Because if the unique cost drivers of our infrastructure project sort of reflect the characteristics of our community, the financing solutions can also reflect the assets that we have on hand in our communities. So again, back to our friends at Totalcom. We have the model of a privately held company. If we are working in a region where there is a strong local ISP partner, where the utility can be owned locally, use local talent, we may have access to a capital stack that looks like a mix of debt and equity held by the ISP. If we look in a different community, Monahans, Texas, far west Texas, community partners there partnered with private equity, bringing in View Capital and Hosted America to match investments from local philanthropy and federal grants to complete their capital stack and fund their projects. But in other parts of the state, there are different solutions because there are different partners and different possibilities based on the folks that we can bring to the table. In Gilmer, we heard from Charlie Cano earlier during the networking session, the general manager of eTex Communications, a co-op. In rural areas, your local telephone co-op, your local electrical co-op may be able to expand upon the utility services that it offers and build out broadband to the places that still need to get connected. Again, a more participatory option, perhaps, for those of us that have co-ops in our region. We think of also maybe municipal ownership. Our friends at the city of Pharr, you are going to hear from them on a panel tomorrow, but also this afternoon at our workforce trainer poster session about how they have used the unique leadership of the city of Pharr in partnership with other municipal governments in the Rio Grande Valley, county-level partners, folks through their metropolitan planning organization to put the money together to help get broadband funded and fill in some of these last gaps. So, as Bryant mentioned previously when he was up here with Ksenia, BEAD awards have been finalized. This is looking like $1.2 billion from federal grants, $177 million in matching matching state grants, covering about 250,000 broadband serviceable locations, about half of which are going to get fiber, the other half a mix of other technologies. For those of you that subscribe to the BDO's monthly newsletter, they just announced this lovely data visualization. You'll get these slides, but you can also go on the BDO's BEAD website to see what regions of the state got what mix of technology for what partners. But the upshot is that BEAD is on its way. However, we know that BEAD may not meet all of our financing needs to get the state fully connected. especially now that that money has been encumbered and sent out. There might be other kinds of funding solutions that we can engage and look at. We have put together a quick survey. It's not exhaustive, but places that we know where we can look for funding for digital opportunity projects in general. That may include infrastructure, but also skills training, workforce development, specific programs that serve target populations like older adults or veterans. Things that we can keep at the top of our mind, or if you have homework, scan this. We'll also send this out in the follow-up packet to this conference. Things that you can think about, while we're also going to learn a little bit from our panelists coming next about how CoBank, a lender, and Totelcom, an ISP, think about filling these final gaps in our capital stack. And I would actually like to invite Jennifer and Hunter and Catherine on stage to get started with our next panel.